All right. The House will come to order. Members will be at their seats. The clerk has opened the roll. You may record your presence. Please rise and give your attention to our House chaplain and remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance, led by Representative Esau.
Let us pray. Gracious and loving God, we come before you today, grateful for your blessings. Already early in this session, there are difficult decisions to be made. We are reminded that your word encourages us to approach your throne with grace and confidence, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. Your word also instructs us that if anyone lacks wisdom, they should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to them. So we boldly come to you today, asking for your mercy, grace, wisdom, guidance, and direction. I ask this in Christ's name, amen.
Have all members had the opportunity to record their presence? The clerk will close the roll and record the attendance. Introduction of bills and concurrent resolutions. The clerk will read.
House Bill number 2113 by Representative Hsu, an act concerning the Governor's Office establishing the Advisory Commission on Asian American Pacific Islander Affairs, composition thereof, appointment of members, powers, and duties. House Bill number 2114 by the Committee on Children and Seniors, an act concerning the Legislature establishing the Kansas Senior Care Task Force, prescribing topics of study, membership, meeting requirements, records, and report. House Bill number 2115 by the Committee on Children and Seniors, an act concerning the Legislature relating to children and minors, safety and well-being of children in the child welfare system in the state of Kansas, establishing the Joint Committee on Child Welfare System Oversight, prescribing duties and membership thereof, requiring an annual report to the Legislature. House Bill number 2116 by the Committee on Children and Seniors, an act concerning children and minors relating to child care assistance eligibility and requirements, exempting certain adults from 20-hour per week work requirement. House Bill number 2117 by Representative Heiberger, an act concerning taxation relating to income tax, rates, sales, and compensating use tax, providing for the sales tax exemptions for food and food ingredients and feminine hygiene products, authorizing local sales tax on food and food ingredients. House Bill number 2118 by the Committee on Elections, an act concerning campaign finance relating to political advertisements. House Concurrent Resolution number 5007 by Representatives Fairchild and Collins, a proposition to amend Article 14 of the Constitution of the State of Kansas by adding a new section thereto relating to the powers of initiative and referendum.
Chair recognizes Majority Leader Hawkins for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Pursuant to House Rule 2311, I move that an emergency be declared and HCR 5003 be advanced to that order of business. Final action on bills and concurrent resolutions, subject to amendment and debate.
You've heard the motion. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. No. The ayes appear to have it. Motion carries. Introduction of bills. Excuse me. The chair recognizes Majority Leader Hawkins for another motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Pursuant to House Rule 2311, I move that House Rule 1704, violation of rules while speaking, be suspended for the purpose of allowing designated members to speak more than twice on HCR 5003. Those members being Representative Humphreys and Representative Clayton.
You've heard the motion. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. Motion carries.
Are we there now? Okay. I don't know. Slow.
For the purpose of carrying HCR 5003, the speaker recognizes Representative Ornberger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There were no committee amendments. Good morning, body. I think this might be the chippiest we're going to be all day. I have the privilege to bring to you to the House floor House Concurrent Resolution 5003, also known as the Value Them Both Constitutional Amendment. I hope you've all had a chance to read over this constitutional amendment, and it is short, just a page and a half. I'm sure we'll have a very vigorous debate, and I believe that we should. Most of us feel very passionate about this issue, and your constituents also agree. I'm going to leave my opening remarks somewhat brief, but I do want to answer the three most basic questions. How did we get here? What is in this constitutional amendment, and why it is important? So how did we get here? In April 2019, the Kansas Supreme Court issued their ruling on Hodges and Nauser versus Schmidt case. Within this ruling, the key takeaway is that the Supreme Court stated that in Section 1 of the Kansas Constitution, there is a right to an abortion. The exact phrase they are referencing to is, all men are possessed of equal and inalienable natural rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. They believe that these rights protect women to decide whether they should or shouldn't continue with their pregnancy. The court protected the newly created right with strict scrutiny standard in this case, which is the most vigorous form of judicial review. I do want to state that I, just like many of you, am not an attorney, so any questions that may be asked on the judicial process, case review, or previous laws and cases, I cannot answer, but I will at least attempt to. So what is actually in this constitutional amendment? The heart of this constitutional amendment is on lines 21 and lines 21 and 23 on page 1. Because Kansas value both women and children, the Constitution of the state of Kansas does not require government funding of abortion and does not create or secure a right to abortion. I want to make it clear that nowhere in this amendment does it state that this is a ban on abortion. I know someone is going to come up here to the well from the opposing side and state that, but it's just simply not true. All this constitutional amendment does is protect our current abortion laws. I call them protections, others call them restrictions, but we need to protect all the hard work that has been done from previous legislatures to empower women. Since 1999, Kansas has saved 15 babies a day due to our abortion industry protections. That's 15 babies we're saving. 15 lives is very remarkable. So finally, why is this important? Like I stated before, Kansas is at risk of losing all of their abortion regulations. Kansas has over 20 abortion protections, and we can lose all of them due to this ruling. With that being said, what's at stake? Here are a couple examples. Without Value Them Both, Kansas will allow unrestricted abortions on healthy babies up until the moment of birth. Parents or legal guardians of pregnant minors should provide personal health care advice to their children. Value Them Both continues the existing protections, which ensures that parents, not strangers, have the right to guide their daughters. At one time, an abortionist in Kansas used a kitchen dishwasher to clean surgical instruments and perform abortions in a carpeted office. Value Them Both protects the current law, which provides similar medical procedures to happen. And finally, current law restricts taxpayer-funded abortions. Without Value Them Both, this protection could be eliminated, and your tax dollars could be used to fund abortions even to the moment of birth. Ultimately, unlimited abortions hurts women and babies. Value Them Both preserves safeguards for those involved within this industry. value them both, lets the people continue to regulate abortion through their elected officials. Kansas feel very passionate about this issue, so why not let them vote? Thank you.
To speak to the resolution, Representative Ruiz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question, and I've been receiving a lot of questions from constituents by phone and also by email. One of the things that stuck out was, how does this amendment affect the federal law of Roe versus Wade? Representative, can you answer that?
Thank you, Representative. It does not affect that.
So there will still be access to women's health via termination of pregnancies in Kansas, despite this resolution?
We are not changing any current laws. We're just trying to keep them in place.
Thank you. One of the things that I see happening here is deprivation of women's civil liberties. And I bring that up because the Good Old Boys Club across the rotunda here with the new Senate president said he will not mandate his mask in his chambers because of people's civil liberties being violated. And we're talking about a whole gender's civil liberties that we're trying to control. The hypocrisy in that is astounding. And even, I know we have people who maybe have a medical condition that can't wear masks, and maybe they can wear a face shield. We also have people who just for political reasons do not wear masks, just based on the last disgracement that we had, who left last Wednesday. When I look around the room and I see the struggle that people are going through, it was brought up in committee about the minorities having the most deaths due to abortion, the most deaths due to violence, the most deaths due to physical and abuse into households, child abuse, and that's true. There's no getting around that. It's a sad fact that people in minority communities suffer this more than they do others. Abortion, and now we're seeing that people in minority communities are suffering more deaths due to the virus. 411,000 deaths plus since last year when we start recording the deaths. If you feel that's not a good comparison, life versus life, I feel that we need to look at what's going on around us, how we perceived, what we're doing to combat, either you're talking about women's health issues through abortion or through people walking and talking face to face. Kansas City, Missouri, I read in the Kansas City Star yesterday where the legislature in Missouri is facing the same problems that we're facing here with people not wearing masks. And they said it's not when or if people are going to be getting sick, it's when they're going to be getting sick. I know we've had people in this chamber, I know people in this chamber who have had abortions, ladies, who have come out and spoke. And we also know that we've had gentlemen and other people speak on having the virus. And hopefully, and thank God that they're alive and well today. But that's not always the truth. We had one of our ex-members whose husband died last week of the virus. I had a friend die over Christmas with the virus. Not a good thing, but life is life, and what do we do about life? And also in the committee, we had proponents to this constitutional amendment bring photos of 2003 abortion clinic, a Planned Parenthood women's health clinic in Kansas City, Kansas, that showed health violations and code violations. But that was 18 years ago. Are we still going to keep that same picture? We know things have changed. So what do we do about that? Well, we vote to limit women's rights, women's civil liberties, based on the assumption that we can control this through a constitutional amendment and maybe go back to these women won't have access to clear, healthy, physically safe pregnancies. And since there's no exemptions called for in this constitutional amendment, we need to examine that as well. Mr. Speaker, I'll be voting against HCR 5003. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Humphreys.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could I ask the maker a few questions? Okay, just a few clarifying questions. She needs to stay back? Okay. Okay. So you mentioned that there are safeguards in law here in Kansas concerning abortion. About how many of those do we have?
We have 23 on the books.
Okay. And when were they passed?
In the, I think, mid-90s, so let's just round to 20 years ago.
Okay. And up until recently, right? You kind of threw that, yeah. Okay, could you name a few of those safeguards that you've picked out?
We have the women's right to know, women's right to know and see. I could go on. We have healthcare rights. I mean, there's a bunch. I could list if you'd like me to.
Okay. So did they have bipartisan support when they were passed?
Yes.
Okay. And were there opponents from the abortion industry when those bills were passed?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thanks. And I'll take this off now that I'm... So, Body, the reason I ask those questions, there's been much said about the necessity of passing this amendment because these safeguards have been put in place and they're in peril if we don't pass value them both. But what exactly does that mean? We hear it, we've all gotten emails about it, but how would that happen? Let me give you an example. Let's just reason together about this. When a law is passed, it may be challenged, and the court decides if the law is constitutional. Sorry if I'm talking too loud. But most laws have a low bar. They're constitutional. The court says, yes, that's fine, put those in place. Some laws have a very high bar, and we call that strict scrutiny. The courts use strict scrutiny when fundamental rights are being burdened. In the Hode's decision, our Supreme Court said that in reviewing laws passed about abortion, the courts must use that very high bar to decide if they can be implemented or not. So, an example, let's say we pass a law concerning the sterilization of medical instruments. We heard about that example that happened, about the abortion clinic that cleaned instruments in the dishwasher. So we pass a bill about standards of sterilization. This is an actual conceptual bill that was brought up last year. The question is, would that be constitutional? For a regular medical clinic, yes, they have a low bar. Yes, we could pass laws about sterilization of instruments. But I ask an attorney who's very knowledgeable in this area particularly, do you think that that law would be found to be constitutional in an abortion clinic? And the answer was no. Can you imagine that? Because of that very high hurdle, every law regarding the issue would be found to be unconstitutional. In fact, it's presumed to be unconstitutional. So we couldn't even pass a law that had to do with sterilization of medical instruments. That is why we need the resolution. All those good regulations that protect women and babies, when they're challenged, they will be found to be unconstitutional. And yes, I believe they will be challenged because we've seen the abortion industry in the past. They fought against even the most basic health and safety standards when those were being regulated in the past 20 years in this body. They have sued on those issues in the past. And those exact safeguards have been struck down in other states because of that high bar, that strict scrutiny. And I do not believe even for a second that the staunchest abortion supporter in this room and in this state want unregulated abortion in Kansas. So let the people of Kansas decide. Let's take it to the people. As it stands now, every safeguard is in danger of being struck down. but value them both preserves the constitutionality of all of those that protect the safety and health of the vulnerable. And it does nothing about the federal rights to abortion. So join me today in protecting those most vulnerable and voting yes on value them both.
Representative Wassinger.
Will the carrier of the bill please answer some questions for me? If we pass value them both, can we still protect women who have been victimized by sexual assault and incest?
Yes.
Do you have any examples of the laws that have protected women in these instances?
Yes. In 2005, there was House Bill 2380, which is the Child Rape Protection Act.
What was the most impactful testimony that you heard in committee hearings regarding sexual assault and incest?
We had a proponent who was sexually assaulted that came and testified in committee. We had a proponent who came and testified in committee that was sexually assaulted, and she shared her story. And I remember going home that night just thinking about it, and she didn't get a chance to finish because we didn't have her testimony was pretty long, and I just remember I thought about it on my drive, and I've read her testimony a couple of times, and it is just very, very impactful.
My final question is, if we approve this, then does it become law, or do we have to bring it to the Kansas voters?
If the House and the Senate both get 2/3 majority on this issue, then it does go to the Kansas voters in November of 2022 on the primary ballot. Oh, March. Sorry, March. No. August. I am so sorry.
So what I'm hearing at this point is that there are laws to protect sexual assault and incest victims, and not every answer is to abort the baby, which we heard in the testimony in the hearing. This woman who testified has suffered greatly and still mourns the death of that first baby. This is very important for us to give Kansans a chance in the best election that has the most voters, that we give them the opportunity to vote for this. Thank you for your time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Speaker recognizes Representative Vaughn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem. Colleagues, I know many of you have made up your minds on the issue of abortion, and I don't pretend that my words have the power to persuade you otherwise. What I do ask is that you consider the extreme implications of the amendment before us. If you replace the word abortion with medical procedure in the first sentence of this bill, it reads as follows: a proposition reserving to the people the ability to regulate a medical procedure through the elected members of the Legislature of the state of Kansas. If this amendment passes, it will give this legislature the sole authority to regulate a medical procedure. Wherever you stand on the nature of abortion, this is an incredibly dangerous legal precedent to set. To do so leads our state down a dark path where our legislative body can regulate the bodies of Kansans. This is not our job. This is the job of medical professionals in consultation with their patients. Moreover, our government was founded on the principle of checks and balances. There is nothing stopping this legislature from passing or upholding medically necessary restrictions on abortion. When it tried to ban D&E, a common and safe procedure used in second trimester abortions, the judiciary put its foot down, citing a woman's inalienable right of personal autonomy and the ability to control one's own body, to assert bodily integrity, and to exercise self-determination. To extract one piece of personal autonomy and deem it unconstitutional is to disadvantage a woman because of her sex. This is sex discrimination. Women deserve equal protection under the law. To use political machinations to go around the Kansas Supreme Court and our Constitution makes a mockery of our state's founding ideals and of democracy. What is more democratic, you might ask, than letting the people of Kansas decide this issue? For most, I would say that human rights should not be put to a popular vote. That is why they are called rights. Second, I would ask, if we really want the people of Kansas to decide this issue, why have the authors of this bill intentionally chosen for the question to be placed on the ballot of a low turnout election? Despite the name of this bill, it does not value the lives of women or those who can become pregnant. It does not include exceptions for abortions in cases of rape, incest, or the endangerment of the mother's life. The proposed language claims that such exceptions may be made. But why would a legislature that has been placing an increasing number of restrictions on abortions for the past decade suddenly have a change of heart? And if the only exception is the endangerment of the mother's life, when does a doctor decide that a woman's life is in imminent danger? Will the doctor need to waste precious minutes of that patient's life in order to call their attorney and ask for an interpretation of the law? If this amendment passes, it will almost certainly lead to an abortion ban, like it has in Alabama, and like it is starting to do in Tennessee and in West Virginia. There will be no protection for Kansans who need access to these services, especially if the federal Supreme Court decides to roll back Roe v. Wade. Women will be forced to put their lives at risk in order to access reproductive health care, because banning abortions does not lead to less abortions. It only leads to less safe abortions. If we truly value women's lives, and those of the lives of those who can become pregnant, then we should be ensuring that their doctors have all of the medical options available to them in order to help their patients. Abortion is one of the safest medical procedures in the United States, safer than a colonoscopy even, and that is how it should be regulated. In my short time here, I have already become aware of many legislators in this very room, on both sides of the aisle, who have had to make the difficult decision to get an abortion. Whether it was to save their own life, the life of a loved one, because the pregnancy was not viable, because they were raped, or because they did not have what they needed they did not have the support or the resources they needed in order to start a family. When someone decides to get an abortion, it is an immensely personal decision and almost certainly something they think about with close scrutiny in conversation with their family, their doctor, and with God. Who are we to judge a person's choices when we ourselves have made those very choices? And how can we take the choice away from others when we ourselves had the ability to choose? This amendment is a wolf in sheep's clothing. And to pretend otherwise is a fallacy. It will lead to a banning of abortions, and it will strip Kansans of their constitutional rights. It is not our job to take away the rights of Kansans, but to protect them. It is not our job to impose the values of a few on millions. For those in this room who speak of individual liberty, do you really mean it? And if so, why are you entitled to greater rights than me? I urge you to please vote no on this amendment. Thank you.
Representative Ruiz.
I have questions for the carrier of the bill. I have questions for the carrier of the bill. You heard that. Good.
Go ahead and state your question.
So in reading the bill, it says that we're going to amend, if we vote yes, we're amending the Bill of Rights of the Constitution. The Bill of Rights, right? Yes, no.
We're adding a new section in the Bill of Rights.
Okay. And the new section says that there's no constitutional right to abortion.
Yes.
In the committee discussions, was there any talk about the abortion industry?
I believe so.
What does that mean, the word industry? Was there an explanation as to what does the word industry mean?
There were groups that testified in favor of abortion.
That's not a definition of industry. Was there a talk about what the definition of the word industry was?
That was a term used by conferees, and so I'm using their definition. I believe that the term industry could be used in different ways.
Body, typically the word industry is used in manufacturing. I've never heard the word industry used in a medical procedure, period, whether it's, you're having your tonsils taken out or whatever it might be. It is not an industry. And so I think that this word is very deceiving, trying to make it sound like if you have a medical practice that also performs abortion, that they're somehow profiting from that as you would manufacturing. That's ridiculous, thinking about abortion as an industry like that. So I urge everyone to vote no on this. You're taking the rights of women away. And last time I looked, we all have rights. We all have human rights, equal to each other. But this body is thinking about just singling out women only. And it's interesting because the majority of our legislature is made of men. So that tells me something, and it tells my constituents something, who have 2 to 1 are urging me to vote no on this. Again, I urge you to vote no on this amendment.
Representative Prost.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's a lot that we're going to debate about this resolution today, but I'm going to focus my area in one narrow field, and that's what I feel is our duty and obligation to respect the Kansas Constitution and the people of Kansas, that we should change it sparingly, and when we do make those changes, we ensure truly that the final verdict lies not with us, but with the people of Kansas. I have an amendment.
Would you care to explain your amendment?
Yes. This amendment changes the date from the August primary to the November general election.
Pretty short explanation. Is there objection to reading of the amendment? Seeing none, you may continue.
So this amendment moves the date from the August primary to the November 22nd general election, the November 22 general election. The research I've done, we've changed the Kansas Constitution about 130 times in our 160-year history. 113 of those have been held during the November general election. 5 appeared on an April special election, and 12 have been decided during an August primary, limited to 3 years, 1972, 1974, and 1986. If you didn't know it, I didn't until I started researching this, we as a state didn't formally outlaw dueling until 1974. We have historically avoided placing controversial issues on August and April elections. I think that's because the spirit of our democracy demands that if we're going to make fundamental changes to our guiding document, it should be done in an election that has turnout and built-in turnout, and that is historically and decidedly the general election. In 1972, there were about 316,000 votes cast in the August election. In the November election of that year, there were about 598,000 votes. In 1974, there were about 277,000 votes in August and 794,000 in November. And in 1986, there were 386,000 votes in August compared to 823,000 votes in November. We know that this is consistently true. November yields higher turnout, whereas primaries tend to pull out partisans. Even this past year, we saw record numbers of new voters participate in the general election who were animated and drawn in by the rhetoric of the national elections. To place this question on the August ballot violates the spirit and intent of our Constitution, on which every one of us swore an oath. It allows this issue, perhaps one of the most divisive and deeply personal issues that we've faced in more than a generation, to be decided by a handful of people who regularly participate in partisan primary elections. While the language of this amendment speaks to the rights of people, we will in effect be sidelining the 550,000 Kansans who do not affiliate with a party. We know they can vote, but we also know that historically they do not. If in this resolution and in this question to the people of Kansas, it's legitimacy that we seek, we have no choice but to move this to the general election, a year that we know consistently draws out higher turnout. We cannot claim that this change to our Constitution represents the will of the people when we've put it on a date in which so many don't participate. Having said all that, I don't expect to realize success today. I know that we all have our marching orders and we'll all do what we're supposed to do. I know that we fear what awaits us if we violate that. So I expect when this vote's tallied, we will give the people of Kansas the easiest thing that we can give them, and precisely the thing they don't need more of, a party line vote. Personally, I gain nothing by making this amendment. In fact, it harms me. It would be much more comfortable for me to stay in that seat, let this debate flow out, let this vote happen in August, and in November it's not my problem. Moving this to November hurts my caucus, hurts the governor, and doesn't do me any good. But I don't think that serves Kansas, and I don't think it serves our Constitution. We have an opportunity here today. We know the votes are here to get this passed, and it will pass today. But we have an opportunity to move above our loyalty to our party, our loyalty to our leaders, and to move this to a date where the people of Kansas can actually participate in this, where we will have robust turnout, where we know that more people will vote. I think that that is kind of in the spirit when we all bear this title, honorable. We don't just get to bear that word in front of our names when we take this office. We earn it through our words and our actions, and we see that they align. I know that we often disagree in this building about the methods that we can deploy to solve our most pressing problems, but we should be able to find agreement on the method on which our Constitution is altered. We must find agreement that if we write over the words of our founding fathers, we do so only with the express permission of a majority of Kansas. I ask you to support this amendment.
Does any member wish to speak to the amendment? Might remind the body to refresh their computers. Make sure, I'm assuming this can be a voice vote, but if chances it wasn't, we need to be using your computers. Representative Arnberg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just would like to make a statement. This is an unfriendly amendment. Every Kansan has every voter in Kansas has the ability to vote in the August primary, no matter your party affiliation. On top of it, this could and most probably will increase voter turnout. Isn't that something that we want? So I'm going to ask you to vote this down.
Does any other member wish to speak to the amendment? Seeing none, Representative, you may close.
I think we know, the numbers support what we know. This should be on a general election. If we're going to change the Constitution of the state of Kansas, it needs to be on a general election. Independent voters can vote in a primary, but we can go back through 160 years of voting data and prove that they don't. I ask you to support this amendment.
You've heard the motion by Representative Prost to amend. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. No. Those appear to have it. Division has been requested. The clerk will roll call has been requested. Seeing a significant number of hands. This is a division roll call vote. The clerk will open the roll. Remind the body you may need to refresh your computer. Representative Collins votes no. Representative Potter votes no. Representative Stogsdill votes aye. If all members had the opportunity to vote, the clerk will close the roll. 40 in favor, 84 against. Motion fails. We're back on the resolution. Representative Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As some of you may recall, we debated, I believe, a virtually identical resolution last year. And I stood here sometime in the dark of the night, as I recall, and spoke for about half an hour about the constitutional principles that underlie the right to personal autonomy, and what a bad idea it is to put people's constitutional rights up for a vote. And I talked to you about how strict scrutiny, the strict scrutiny standard, does not prevent health and safety regulation of abortion clinics any more than it does any other activity in our daily lives. And my colleagues who believe otherwise are sorely misguided. And we also talked about the fact that although much may be said about whether this resolution provides exceptions that would prevent this legislature from preventing a woman who was the victim of rape, incest, fetal anomaly, or otherwise from terminating a pregnancy, because this resolution clearly says that the Kansas legislature can do exactly that. But I do not propose here today to repeat those arguments. Most of you have heard them, and I'm sure you've considered and pondered them. So instead, I rise here today in defense of life. This is a pro-life resolution. I support the protection of life. I support the protection of life from the point in gestation where life is recognized, whether under the law, by one's religion, or otherwise. And that right to the protection of life does not end at birth. I support the protection of life from the cradle to the grave. And so, I have an amendment. I have an amendment that will protect life from the cradle to the grave. And it will add to the protections of life in this resolution, because we need to expand the protections of this resolution. We need to expand the protections of this resolution so that they don't just end at birth, but instead that we protect life from the cradle to the grave. And so with that, Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment, and I ask that the amendment be read in its entirety.
Representative, you want to explain your amendment?
I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker, I could not hear.
Do you want to further explain your amendment?
I would like to have the amendment read.
The clerk will read.
Page 1, line 9 by striking both and inserting all. In line 20 by striking regulation of abortion and inserting protection of life. In line 21 by striking all before the comma and inserting life. In line 22 by striking and inserting a comma. In line 23 after abortion by inserting and capital punishment is and shall forever be prohibited. In line 32 by striking both and inserting all. On page 2 in line 3 after the period by inserting, the amendment would prohibit capital punishment, otherwise known as the death penalty. In line 6 by striking and in line 8 after abortion by inserting and prohibit capital punishment, otherwise known as the death penalty. In line 10 by striking and in line 13 after abortion by inserting and would continue to allow imposition of capital punishment. On page 1 in the title, in line 3 by striking and in line 5 after Kansas by inserting and prohibiting capital punishment.
Representative for further explanation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To continue, what this does is it takes the concept that Kansas legislature is here to protect life and it extends that to the living. It says, renames this amendment the Value Them All Amendment. All. It is not my place to judge the quick and the dead. It is not my place to judge whether people who have committed heinous crimes should go to hell. That determination is for the Almighty, not for mortal man. We can talk about the many, many miscarriages of justice that have happened in our system of justice. We can talk about the men, and that's thus far they've all been men, who've been convicted of murder in this state but have been exonerated. We are very fortunate that we have not executed an innocent man that we know of. But the day will come when the justice system fails and we become collectively responsible for the murder of an innocent person. I will not stand here quietly and wait for that to happen. You should not sit there quietly and wait for that to happen. Rather, today is your chance and today is your opportunity to ban capital punishment in Kansas forever. Examine your consciences carefully. If you believe that life begins at the moment of conception and should be protected from the moment of conception, then explain to me why you would not want to protect the living. Why would you not want to protect the living? That's what this amendment does. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
To speak to the amendment, Representative Onneberger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After reading all of this, and I enjoyed having a chance to hear the clerk read it in its entirety, I would have to challenge the germaneness. I believe that we are bringing forth another issue within this bill. Thank you.
Germaneness has been challenged. Will the Rules Committee make a decision? Representative Patton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Rules Committee has met and we had a discussion over this proposed amendment. The carrier of the bill attempted to make both the amendment and the resolution we're debating about life. But if you actually look at both the resolution and the amendment, that's not exactly what we're talking about here today. The bill itself deals with the regulation of a type of procedure performed by a physician. The amendment has us ask about what type of punishment that the government can use when people commit heinous crimes. So you have civil on one side, criminal on the other. We certainly would not allow a health care bill and a bill that dealt with crimes and punishment to be combined and find those germane. And then we talked about the confusion that voters would have, because again, you're presenting to them two potentially conflicting issues. Certainly not a single issue, and because of that, Mr. Speaker, I find that the amendment is not germane.
Rule of the chair is not germane. Representative Carmichael.
Mr. Speaker, I challenge the ruling of the Rules Committee.
The ruling of the chair has been challenged. I'll remind the body this is a debatable motion and is only debatable by the following people: the maker of the motion to amend, which is Representative Carmichael, the carrier of the resolution, Representative Finch.
Carrier of the resolution.
I already said that. Who's that on?
And then
He's not designating anybody.
And the minority leader is not going to have a designee. Each member is limited to 2 minutes. Representative Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I understand I am recognized for 2 minutes.
That is correct.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Distinctions without a difference. Distinctions without a difference. The purpose of the rule regarding germaneness is not to limit good ideas, and it's not to prevent compromises which result in legislation which the Rules Chair thinks might be confusing. There's nothing confusing about this. Number one, it bans abortion, and number two, it bans capital punishment. They're not internally contradictory. The fact that something might be confusing is not grounds to find a resolution non-germane. Now, we're going to hear from the Speaker Pro Tem, who's going to start talking about some concept of points of connection. You can read your Mason's Manual, you can read your rules, you won't find any mention of that anywhere. This 2 points of contact rule is something that was thought up by a man named Lance Kinzer. It's not the law, it's not required. So if you support life, then you should vote to overrule the chair. Thank you.
Representative Marburger. Representative Finch.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good morning, body. It's awkward not to go back for a rules ruling after the last several years. I want to commend the Rules Committee for the work that they did in considering this. I don't need to talk about 2 points of contact or prior rules chairs. What I will tell you is this. If this amendment were to be found to be germane, you'd be submitting 2 separate and distinct questions to the voters of this state. An issue, on 2 issues that people can have very different opinions about. People can be for the value them both amendment and for capital punishment. They could be for value them both and against capital punishment. And they can hold a range of ideas on these 2 policy proposals, but they will have only one vote when they fill in the bubble on the ballot next August, yes or no. And one of the hallmarks of germaneness is that you don't present two separate and distinct questions in one measure. And so to the extent that this does so, it flunks every germaneness test under Roberts, under Masons, under our House rules, under the rules of the United States House of Representatives, and under British parliamentary procedure. It is not germane. It asks people to make a choice on two separate questions to which they can only give one answer. And therefore, it is not germane. It is not right, and it should not be combined in this one amendment. I ask that you sustain the ruling of the Rules Chair, that you vote yes to sustain the very fair and deliberate ruling of the Chair and the committee. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, body.
As a reminder, a yes vote will sustain the ruling of the Chair. A no vote will overturn the ruling. The question arises, shall the chairperson's ruling be sustained? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no? No. The ayes appear to have it. Motion carried, or excuse me, the Rules Chair is affirmed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To continue debate on the principal motion. I would have liked to have voted aye today on this bill. I would have liked to have voted aye to protect life. But because of the application of procedural rules, we now establish categories of life. We protect the lives of the unborn while we execute the living. I believe that that is hypocritical. It is contradictory. It is not consistent with my religious tradition. I suspect it's not consistent with most of yours. And I don't think that Kansans will fall for the procedural barriers that have been imposed here to the protection of life. So I urge that you vote no on HCR 5003. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Continuing on the resolution, Representative Stockdale.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I guess I should give a brief context before I make my remarks here. There are some of us in this House that are actually old enough to remember the days before Roe v. Wade. Unfortunately, I am one of those. And I grew up right here in Topeka. I was in high school for most of the time, and a little bit of college before Roe v. Wade became the law of the land. And abortions were definitely available right here in Topeka. It was not talked about. It was dangerous. I'm sure that people died. And I remember being in high school and knowing that didn't really understand a lot about what abortions were, but it was a couple of options for girls that I went to high school with if they got into trouble and wanted to terminate a pregnancy. The wealthy ones took a semester off to study abroad, mostly in Sweden. The other ones, there were a couple of places that we knew right here in Topeka that would take care of the problem. And it was not a pretty situation how they took care of that problem. I feel that this will take us back to those days, or certainly closer to those days, which we should never repeat in this state. We should never put women at risk like that again. And we have the opportunity to not put those women at risk. Last year, when we had the wisdom in this House to vote down basically the same amendment, we did so. I wrote a piece for the Kansas City Star, which they published, and I thought that would be the end of it. And I brought it with me today because I think that it would probably be very appropriate again for this year. I just wanted to review a little bit of it with you for a moment. I wrote, as a member of the Kansas House of Representatives, I can honestly say that I believe there is not a single member of the House that would not like to find ways to lower the number of abortions in Kansas. That being said, I voted no on the constitutional amendment on abortion that came before the House last Friday. I voted against the amendment because I believe it falsely promised a simplistic answer to a very complicated problem. It offered a just say no approach to the abortion issue. That approach has been tried before and was a dismal and sometimes fatal approach for both mother and fetus. This was a politically motivated amendment aimed at furthering the political careers of some in the House and the Senate. This amendment would have continued to deeply divide us as legislators and Kansans. The amendment was poorly written, and supporters were insisting it be placed on the August ballot, knowing that August elections draw the least interest and the fewest voters. Not putting this issue on the November ballot proves that this is more about politics than people. Any issue of this magnitude should be put before the people of Kansas when it will reach the most number of the people of Kansas, not the fewest. Over 140,000 Kansas women have no access to family planning services, including birth control. If the legislature were seriously interested in lowering the number of abortions in Kansas, they would support more easily available and affordable access to contraception, as well as more comprehensive sex education. They would also support the funding necessary to place more counselors and more psychologists in our public schools. If they were really interested in lowering abortions, they would support expanding Medicaid. Medicaid expansion would give low-income pregnant women who might not be able to afford another child the comfort of knowing that she and her child would have access to affordable, quality health care if she carried that child to term. They would support the expansion of postnatal medical care, expand the availability of pre-K classes in our public schools, and provide better job training opportunities for low-income mothers. All of these programs would give low-income pregnant women hope that they would be able to care for and financially provide for that child. I would also like to see the formation of a bipartisan task force of women legislators to work on a practical plan to address lowering the abortion rate in Kansas. Such a bipartisan task force of women legislators was instrumental in creating a plan which helped us overturn the disastrous Brownback tax experiment in 2017. Such a task force could be instrumental in developing a working plan on the abortion issue. I doubt that leadership in the House and the Senate would support the formation of such a task force, so it may be up to individual rank-and-file women legislators in the House and Senate to establish their own ad hoc task force, similar to what they did in 2017 that overturned the Brownback tax plan. Kansans have a long history of being able to solve complicated problems. We have the ability to address the abortion issue through a process of discussion, compromise, and cooperation. The Just Say No constitutional amendment is not the answer to this problem, and that is why it was rejected by the Kansas House. The Kansas legislature should now try to craft an abortion reduction solution that could be a national model. Would this be easy? Absolutely not. But as John Kennedy said, we don't do it because it's easy, we do it because it's hard. It is time to make a commitment to do the hard work necessary to accomplish a solution that is worthwhile, effective, and worthy of national attention. It will be interesting to see if leadership is interested in actually finding a solution or simply promoting politics as usual. I think we have the ability to address this issue in this House and do it in such a way that it will provide programs and services and facilities that will provide for adequate and exceptional health care for women that will lower the number of abortions and will do so in a much more effective way than the just say no approach of this amendment. I will be voting no on this amendment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Ballard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In reviewing the bill, HCR 5003, and the brief, part of the language says, further, the language would state, to the extent permitted by the U.S. Constitution, the people of Kansas, through their elected state representatives and senators, may pass laws regarding abortion, including but not limited to laws that account for circumstances of pregnancy resulting from rape or incest, or circumstances of necessity when necessary to save the life of the mother. Mr. Speaker, I have an amendment.
Would you wish to explain it?
Mr. Speaker, may I ask that the amendment be read?
The clerk will read.
Page 1, line 22, by striking and inserting quotation marks. The Constitution of the United States Constitution of the State of Kansas. In line 23, after abortion, by inserting except for circumstances of pregnancy resulting from rape or incest, or circumstances where the mother's life is in danger. In line 26, by striking all after abortion, by striking all in lines 27 and 28. In line 29, by striking all before the period. In line 34, after the first abortion, by inserting except in the case of rape, incest, or circumstances where the mother's life is in danger. On page 2, in line 1, by striking all after abortion, by striking all in line 2. In line 3, by striking all before the period. In line 5, after abortion, by inserting except in the case of rape, incest, or circumstances where the mother's life is in danger.
Representative, like to further explain?
Thank you, Mr. Sermon. I don't think we need any further explanation.
Does any member wish to speak to the amendment? Representative Barker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just would like to note that all women deserve safe and clean abortion clinics, and we should. I just have to reiterate that I don't think that this is necessary. It is in there for a reason, and that's why this is an unfriendly amendment. Thank you.
Anyone else like to speak? Representative Sawyer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of the amendment. You know, the supporters of this amendment say it's to protect the laws we have on the books. Well, the laws we have on the books do allow abortion in certain circumstances. And I don't think any of us should try to make a decision for a woman that has been raped or has faced incest. I certainly don't think we should make a decision that would allow a woman to die. I think these are three very important exceptions, and I think that regardless of how you feel, and if you support this amendment overall, these exceptions should be in here. This makes the bill extremely, extremely extreme without these exceptions. I urge you to support this amendment.
Representative Humphreys.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I just want to be clear about what this does. is if we pass the amendment, but we have taken out those pieces in this amendment, then women who have been sexually assaulted and in that situation, they do not have the protections that we are offering if we pass this amendment. For instance, parental notification. Rape and incest, no parental notification. So I think this does the opposite of what is the best, because if we pass the amendment, then we are leaving those protections in place. But if we have taken out the exceptions, then those particular cases are still under that high bar of strict scrutiny. I think that harms women. So I'm against the amendment. Thank you.
Representative Clayton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of this amendment because I think one of the biggest problems with this bill is that the language in it is confusing. When we have this going out to the public, there's a double negative in there that says that it's included but not limited to. I think that if we are to be consistent with what we're doing, which is giving the voters a chance to vote, that we want to make it very, very clear to them exactly what this does. This is an opportunity for us to be forthright and to be honest. And it's also an opportunity for us to show Kansans that we do have sympathy for people who are victims of rape and incest, and that we do not want to condemn a woman to death simply because she became pregnant. And also just think about this from the standpoint that rape and incest are generally bad, and maybe just vote it down just on that reason. Guys, we can do this. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Any other member wish to speak to the amendment? Representative Heiberger. Would remind the body to refresh their browsers on their computers.
Hi, I'm just here to respectfully disagree with the representative from Wichita's interpretation of the effect of this amendment. My understanding of what this amendment does is it would protect the right of a woman to abortion in the case of rape, incest, or where the mother's life is in danger, but would not otherwise restrict the legislature's ability to regulate abortion clinics or to take other abortion restrictions that weren't related to those categories. So thank you.
Any other members wish to speak to the amendment? Not seeing any. Representative Ballard, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I opened by reading what was actually in the bill. I did not attempt to make it complicated. I read what was there. And again, it says, the people of Kansas, through their elected state representatives and senators, may pass laws regarding abortion, including but not limited to laws that account for circumstances of pregnancy resulting from rape or incest, or circumstances of necessity when necessary to save the life of the mother. If we want to put this on the ballot, we should make sure that it is transparent and very clear as to what we are asking people to vote for. That is all I'm attempting to do. It was in the bill. I have worked with young girls and women who were pregnant resulting from rape and/or incest. It has been difficult and painful for them to talk about and relive their experiences. Why would we deny these young girls and women an abortion due to the unfortunate and horrific circumstances they endured? Why would we sacrifice their lives? It is bad enough to have endured such circumstances that we would not want for our sisters, our cousins, our friends, our mothers. Why would we deny them an abortion? This was not their making. And why would we not look at the life of the mother? And we should talk about the health of the mother, because without health, you do not have life. I would ask you to vote for this amendment because it protects the most vulnerable, and it was not their making. I ask for your vote. Thank you.
You've heard the motion by Representative Ballard to amend. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. No. The ayes have it. Division has been called for. The clerk will open the roll, and you may record your vote. Seeing 15 hands, roll call is in order. Representative Heiberger votes aye. Has every member had the opportunity to vote? Representative Sawyer votes no. That was Sywert. Any other members wish to record the vote? Representative Helmer votes. She's standing. Is that a yes or a no? She votes aye. Representative Helmer, was that an aye or a no? She votes no. The clerk will close the roll. "38 voted in favor, 86 against. The amendment fails. Back on the resolution, Representative Alcala.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We all heard the old saying, you should never talk religion and politics, but today we're doing both. I'm a strong practicing Catholic with my own personal beliefs, but I believe women should have the right to choose what happens to their own life and body with choices. If a woman does not, somebody think it's funny? If you do, come on up here and express the comedy. If women do not have the right to choose, then it's a civil rights violation. I can believe something without having to impose my belief on others. That's true separation of church and state. I will be voting no. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Bishop.
Joseph Robinette Biden once said that when he arrived in the Senate, some of the longer-term senators took him aside and coached him. And one of the things they said was, you may very much disagree with one of your colleagues, but don't attempt to attack their motivation. I think that's a good rule. It's difficult to avoid that or avoid the temptation to do that now. The process for this measure has been fraught with political surrounding. I believe it's possible that we would not be in this chamber at this time, as uncomfortable and frankly unsafe as it is, if it were not for this measure, and maybe a couple of other things. One of the things that the ruling of the Kansas Supreme Court focused on was autonomy. One of the elements that Roe v. Wade focused on was privacy. These are rights that we should all be able to take for granted to the greatest extent possible. I would like to add that in the wording of the bill, the power to regulate is the power to ban. The explainer that is included in the resolution that we're voting on today is deceptive. It leads a voter who's staring at the question on their ballot to believe that there will be exceptions for the life of the mother and then cases of rape and incest. That's in the explainer. It is not in the actual piece that will go into the Constitution. It will not be in the Constitution. It will not be in Kansas statutes annotated. I believe that is deceptive in the extreme. What we're doing here today is a historical artifact. I don't know how many it will take, but it won't take very many generations for this to be undone, for our Constitution to have to once again be changed. And one of the reasons that that is a fact is simply the matter of medical technology. The process of a woman deciding for herself elements having to do with her body and her health, both physical and mental, are increasingly becoming within the reach for a woman to take care of that with ease and safety. So it won't be long. Getting back to the question of motivation, I know that there are solid feelings on both sides. I know that I have colleagues who truly believe that this is probably the most important thing they're going to do in this legislature, is to push this sort of a measure and begin to remove the possibility of women to choose for themselves what they do with their bodies and what happens to their bodies. I don't question that. It is simply wrong, and in future general opinion, coming generations will show us that. I vote no on this resolution, Mr. Chairman, and thank you.
Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First, uncharacteristically, I'd like to say something nice about my committee chair and my committee vice chair. And if you see the chair, would you pass my remarks on to him? Oh, he's here. I expected him to be here today. We had numerous conferees asking to present testimony at the committee, and consequently, in order to accommodate people, the time for each was extremely limited. And there were moments where I think some may have perceived the actions of our chair as harsh, which is not to be confused with rigid, because what he attempted to do in being fair to everyone was a rigid enforcement of the rules so that both sides had an equal opportunity to present their testimony. And I remember not so long ago that sitting in a similar forum, the attempt to try to accommodate everyone more so than they were allowed under the rules led to unfairness, because by the time we got to the second side, they were shorted, and that chair was severely criticized for being unfair when I know that was not what he was intended. So, timekeeper, vice chair, timekeeper, you did an excellent job keeping time. The chair did an excellent job of enforcing it fairly. Unfortunately, and it's been alluded to earlier, there were some people who had some very powerful testimony to offer, and the time restrictions really took away from their ability to do that on both sides. And in a moment, I'm going to touch on some of that testimony that I think got overlooked. But the one woman that we referred to, one of you referred to, or maybe you and the representative from Hayes both, I did take the time to apologize to her, not for how she was treated, but for the time limiting her ability to give the powerful story that she had to give. I received an email last night at 1:14 a.m. It's very short, so I'd like to read it. Dear Senator, I think it's cute, she calls me Senator. No longer a constituent, but still asking for a favor. During debate tomorrow on abortion, will you please let the members know that a Catholic pro-life leader founder of the oldest state pro-life organization, lobbyist against abortion for 25 years, as well as many of their pro-life constituents, do not support and in fact oppose this amendment. I believe that when Kansans understand it and all the ramifications, they will blame those who misled them. I promised her in response to her email I would convey that, and I do. Mr. Speaker, would the carrier of the resolution yield to a question or two?
You can ask your question.
It was referenced in committee by a couple members, and again by the carrier of the bill, a number of 15 babies a day, and I was looking for more elaboration on the origin of that number and the significance or the meaning of it, if you could, please.
Thank you, Representative. I don't have that in front of me, but I know that I got that information from the Kansans for Life organization.
And we don't know how they derived that statistic? We don't know how that number was derived?
KDH&E stats.
No, and pardon me for the lack of clarity in my question. How did we come up with that number? What 15 babies a day will be saved by the passage of this resolution, correct?
15 babies a day are currently being saved. Since 1999, the numbers that were reported were 40 abortions a day, and now we're down to 25 abortions a day due to KDH&E stats. So by passing this amendment, we are making sure that we are still saving 15 babies a day.
So if I understood your answer, in essence, we have fewer abortions today than we did. But does the research indicate that that's directly related to the measures that have been enacted, or is that simply education, changes in social mores? Is there something that says that these laws that we have passed are the cause of the reduction of babies dying?
It is stated that, again, they are stats. We have certain laws, like for instance, the 24-hour waiting period, that it allows the patients to go and think about what procedure they could have been having. And so that is where it comes from, but that's where we're getting our information from. So we're taking it from 1999 stats to where we are today.
Well, I think there are a number of ways, and the good representative from Johnson County was on to some of those ways to address how we all might try to achieve, I think, a goal that is unanimously held in this chamber, and that is the reduction of abortions. A year ago, in a land far, far away, I listened to a debate on this issue, and the resolution was almost identical because, well, excuse me, it was significantly different because it called for an election in the August primary of 2020. And we had a grand debate similar to what occurred earlier today about the number of people voting in a primary versus a general election. And we were told by the proponents of this proposal that it had to be on the August primary because we needed to get it done. That the Hodes decision had placed every abortion regulation in Kansas in jeopardy, and if we didn't act fast, the world would come to a screeching halt. That's why we had to have it on the August ballot and couldn't wait until November. Another question of the carrier of the bill: do we know what happened to that argument? The one I just brought up, were you not listening? I don't mind repeating it. Essentially, the argument of a year ago that we had to have the measure on the August ballot instead of November so we could get it done quickly. I wasn't over here then, and I never read the paper, so I'm only assuming that that sort of debate or that point was raised in this chamber last year as well. And my question is, what happened to that argument that we had to get this done quickly?
Thank you, Representative. Sorry, I just keep thinking about the fact that you didn't get my Christmas card this year, and I know you are, so I will bring that. I think the post office lost it, so I will get you another one. But the one we found out last year that, and we heard it from the opposing side, that it was too quick. And that we need to inform the voters. And so that's what we're doing. We're allowing a year and a half for both sides to inform the voters. And all voters can vote in Kansas, no matter the party affiliation, in August.
So you're no longer worried about the cases that are, or the laws that are going to get overturned and all the babies that are going to be killed?
We are very much concerned about that.
Me too. That's why I have an amendment, Mr. Speaker.
Would you like to explain your amendment?
No, because it's only a few words and it speaks for itself. If I may have it read, please.
Yeah, clerk may read. Appears short.
Oh, I need a copy of that.
Page 2, line 21, by striking 2,222 and inserting 3, 2021.
Representative?
The explanation of which is simply that instead of waiting until 2022, the August primary, we would do it this year in August. At 15 babies a day, that works out to 5,460 babies that might be killed between now and August of 22. Now, I've read material from the proponents, the lobbying group that's asking us or instructing us, however you want to interpret how to vote today, and they've said that any amendment to this resolution is a poison pill. I'd ask, if I could, the carrier of the bill if she knows what a poison pill amendment is. I didn't think she wanted to answer that question, so let me read the definition that I looked up. And by the way, if there's anyone that wants to oppose this amendment, I welcome that. And on your way up, if you would prepare a retort to this definition of poison pill and explain to me how this amendment is a poison pill amendment. Poison pill amendment. An amendment to a bill that considerably weakens the bill's intended effect or ruins the bill's chance of passing. So, if voting a year sooner somehow jeopardizes the passage of this bill, I can't figure out how that is. If voting a year sooner makes you less inclined to vote for this resolution, I need you to explain that to me. I'd answer any questions, Mr. Speaker.
Any members wish to speak to the amendment? Representative Arnberger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to reiterate, like I have any other time, this is an unfriendly amendment. I just do want to state that the Senate Concurrent Resolution 1605, which is what we passed in the Kansas Legislature in 2019 dealing with the census, we put that on the November 2019 ballot, which was an off year as well, and voter turnout was only 19%, or 18%, I apologize. We want higher voter turnout, obviously, on this issue. And I do want to state that also on that, we only had three House members vote against that. So I don't believe that this amendment has anything to do with when it's on the ballot. So I will be opposing this amendment. The constitutional amendment has to do with putting on the ballot, but I will be opposing this current amendment.
Anyone else like to speak to the amendment?
May I respond?
See none, Representative, you may close.
Well, actually, the only thing the amendment has to do is when we vote on it. And mind you, if you were listening, if you had been listening, you would have heard me say, or you would not have heard me say anything about turnout. I wasn't arguing that it should be in August of 2021 as opposed to 2022 because the turnout would be greater. I think all of that discussion is speculation. I do happen to agree with what was said earlier when we were having the earlier discussion, and that is I think this amendment being on the ballot will increase turnout, which I think is always a great thing. There's a reason that the proponents of this bill are asking for it to be on the August 22 primary and not 2021. And I was listening to you, Representative, when you said, don't question the motivations of someone. So I'm not going to question their motivations. I'm simply going to declare what they are. This is motivation to put this on the August ballot is for those handful of people in this chamber that might consider themselves a moderate in the majority party to be eliminated from this body. And let me just say that I witnessed in the last partisan primary the elimination of many people who were labeled or considered themselves a moderate member of the majority party who had voted in favor of a similar resolution to the one in front of us today, and it did them zero good in terms of avoiding their elimination by those people more extreme. For those of you who may have or view yourself as moderate, don't dare be moderate on anything you vote on, including this, of course, because it ain't going to help you, it ain't going to save you simply because you voted against my amendment. If we truly believe that we need the passage of this resolution to save 15 babies a day, then I ask you to vote against this amendment. And then go to bed tonight thinking about the 5,460 babies that will perish under your belief between August of 2021 and August of 2022. I don't know how you can truly believe that and vote to wait to amend the Constitution. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move my amendment.
You've heard the motion by Representative. You've heard the amendment motion. You've heard the motion to amend by Representative Miller. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. No. The ayes have it. Excuse me. The noes have it. It's okay, Representative Smith, I got it. The noes have it.
What?
The noes have it. The amendment did not carry. To clarify, I misspoke and called it the wrong way. The noes, was there a division or roll call requested? Representative, you may continue. Back on the resolution.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I won't hold that against you nearly as much as not getting my usual Christmas card from the carrier of the resolution. Some people make mistakes. Some people make egregious mistakes. I am a Roman Catholic, and notwithstanding certain scars against people of my faith, I am a solid Roman Catholic, and I am taught to forgive those who stray from the laws of God, and I do. For many of you in this room, I would expect that your position on this resolution comes easily, either one way or the other way. For me, it does not. But I am both pro-life and pro-choice. And I believe you can be both. I was born a Christian, but I didn't come to embrace the Catholic faith until well into my adulthood. So I did so after much thought, much deliberation, and a sound belief that the underpinnings of that faith were consistent with how I viewed my God and my Lord. I don't particularly, sitting out there, care to hear a lot of down here about me or I, and I don't hold it against people that do. And I hope you don't hold today against me, because it probably will be the last time I make reference to me or I. But this issue is important in that context. Because for me, this amendment is not about who or what I am. It's about what I am not. And while I hope it's obvious, I will state I'm not a woman. And I may act as though sometimes, but I am not God. So, I don't do a lot of professing to those who do not subscribe to my faith how they ought to go about their faith or even have a faith. I will hold to mine. I will do the best in the eyes of my Lord to adhere to what I believe the teachings of my Lord are, but I will also more so, likewise I suppose, adhere to the oath I took a couple weeks to support the Constitution, and equally to represent not my own view, but the views of the people that I represent. And I have a firm feel for how the people that I represent in the 58th District, not unanimously, but for the most part, believe what is right and wrong about what we're doing today. I will oppose the resolution. I will say that had my amendment been adopted and the one proposed by the representative from Douglas, I would have voted for submitting this to the voters in that fashion. So, I go back to my point that my amendment was not offered as a poison pill. In fact, if the votes are short today, I may be one of those people you want to come back to write a resolution that is not attempting to fool the voters of Kansas. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank the body.
Representative Keither.
Good afternoon. I think, well, not quite. It feels like it. January 20th was a new day for this nation, new leadership in Washington, one of whom is Kamala Harris. She became the Vice President of the United States of America, a role model for girls, young women to follow everywhere. Not only in the United States, but to be looked up all over the world at the accomplishment we have made. Excuse me. Just think of it. Not only is she the first woman to serve in this position, she's the first African American woman, the first South Asian woman, a wife, a mother, an auntie. Think about all of those women and equality. This is 2021, the year 2021. I arrived in this chamber in 1997. Do the math. 25 years ago, I came into this chamber. And for 25 years, we're still having this debate. We're having the same debates over controlling women by controlling how they are allowed to handle their own personal health care. Health care can determine a pathway, a life for a girl, a woman, what they choose to follow, to dream, to be the best that they can possibly be in any given field they choose to do, to be perhaps the President of the United States. But here we are, 25 years, still, yet, telling women they can't possibly manage to make their own decisions with their own physician. Equality? Not in Kansas, because where is a similar amendment to deny a right to men? We don't ever debate the part they play in this process. And now, after 25 years of chipping away at a woman's personal, private decision, you now want to address this by taking away, by denying this personal decision by putting it in the Kansas Constitution? I find this disturbing and, yes, offensive. In the 1960s, Kansas was at war, way before the rest of the nation as it existed. Our people fought fiercely for the rights and the equality of all people. All people. This is 2021, and we are still at war. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Heiberger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I resolved today to not be repetitive, so fortunately for you, most of my prepared remarks have gone away. One thing I do want to say, though, is if you're a conservative, you should like the Hodes decision. In the Hodes decision, the Kansas Supreme Court found that our Bill of Rights contains a right to bodily autonomy, and it's from that they derived the right to an abortion. If you don't like mandatory vaccinations, you should like the fact that our Constitution has a right to bodily autonomy. But instead, we're here today to alter our Constitution to allow the government, and that's you and me and everybody in this body, you are the government, to allow the government to force a woman to have a child she doesn't want. And that doesn't sound like small government to me. You know, I offered an amendment in committee that would have turned the constitutional law on abortion in the state back to where it was before the Hodes decision, which would be the undue burden standard in the Casey case, but would keep it there in case of any further changes by the U.S. Supreme Court. That amendment was soundly rejected, which says to me that the intent of this amendment is not to roll back the Hodes decision, but to open the door for serious restrictions in the state if the U.S. Supreme Court overturns the Roe v. Wade decision. And if this amendment passes, the U.S. Supreme Court overturns Roe v. Wade, there will be absolutely no restrictions to what this body can do to limit abortion. I think that should be concerning, because we've seen what's happened in Tennessee when a similar amendment has passed. Immediately, a bill has been introduced, and I believe it's passed, that would essentially ban abortion. I think it's important to remember that no society in history has ever eliminated abortion. Those societies who've tried to strictly ban abortion, the results have been disastrous. And if you don't believe me, look at what happened in Romania under the communist dictatorship in the 1980s. It was, women went back-to-back room abortions, suffered and died, and their orphanages filled up with unwanted children. Now, if you really want to, this is repetitive, somebody else said it. If you really want to reduce the number of abortions in the state, let's work together to stop the circumstances that make women want or need abortions. Let's assure access, universal access to contraception, raise wages for working families, make sure that working families have access to health care. And if we do that, I can't prove it, but I can almost guarantee you that we will reduce the number of abortions in the state by more than all of the restrictions that this body's passed in its entire history, way more than 15 babies a day. So I would encourage you to join me in voting no.
Representative Clayton.
Could the carrier of the bill stand for a question, please? Oh, I can't remember how we're doing this with socially distancing, so I do apologize for that. My question is responding to something that you stated earlier, where you mentioned that having that the lack of exceptions was necessary to the bill, and so I'd like you to speak to that a little bit more if you could. Thank you. Yes, earlier in our debate, I don't have the video in front of me, but there was a question that was asked about the exceptions for rape, incest, and life of the mother, and you stated that that was necessary to the language of the bill, and so I just wanted to see a little bit more about what you had to say in that regard.
Representative, I don't know if I spoke to it. I think that another representative spoke to it, but it's in the bill for pure example for the voters to know what exactly we're talking about.
Thank you. And again, I know that I keep hammering on this exceptions thing, but I do feel like that language will confuse the voters at the ballot box, and it is our moral obligation that if we are putting something on the ballot, it is our job as this body to make sure that we are vetting that language and making it as simple and clear to our constituents as possible. I have major concerns about this ballot language, and again, just wanted to express that and have that for the record. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you.
Representative Penn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, fellow members of the House, unlimited and unregulated abortion hurts women and children. It is not a Kansas value. I urge you to support the Value Them Both Amendment to the Kansas Constitution. Kansans have the right and want the opportunity to vote on this issue. They desire, by the emails they've sent me, to vote to address the Value Them Both Amendment on the primary ballot in 2022, and they want to courageously express both their intent and the consent of the governed. So I ask you, how does your vote today on Value Them Both exhibit courage or cowardice? But before you answer that question, please consider the story of Estelle. Growing up so far north in Florida that they call it Georgia, Estelle was not raised in the most ideal of circumstances. Thrown out of her home, which was abusive, with her alcoholic father returning from the Korean War, and her jealous mother, she moved into her uncle's family in the same small town. They had a daughter that was near her age, so Estelle hung around with her cousin's friends. One evening in 1971, her cousin's boyfriend raped her. Now pregnant for the first time, without college education, without job prospects, a traditional family model, or a husband, Estelle was soon without a home again. Despite her trauma, and despite and against the advice of embarrassed family members, Estelle refused to compound her trauma by getting an abortion. She instead chose life for her son. 4 years later, while in a physically and psychologically abusive marriage to a loveless husband who endangered her life, Estelle birthed her next son. And about 2 years after that, Estelle became pregnant again in that marriage and delivered her third son. and was overwhelmingly pressured to abort that baby due to respiratory issues and developmental issues in the respiratory system. Estelle refused to even name that son. So deep was her hurt, her pain, and her anguish at that marital betrayal. The child was eventually named by that same female cousin who, from all those years ago, her boyfriend had date raped her before Roe v. Wade was ever penned. I am that third son. Before she passed away, my mother Estelle revealed to me that I was supposed to be aborted. I was slated for death and brutal dismemberment in accordance with every excuse promoted by the pro-death forces. She had too many kids. I was sickly. I was born into a single-income household with marital problems and financial insecurity. My life was dependent on my mother's mental health and convenience. And oh yes, my skin color put me on Margaret Sanger's human weed list. She endured so much pressure to kill me, but refused to do so. In her deep courage, Estelle gave me life when all the forces of hell and society coerced her not to. I was able to be raised in foster care from the age of 3 through 18. I was able to serve and retire after a full, honorable career in the U.S. Army, to lead troops into battle and defend our freedoms against enemies, foreign and domestic, on 4 different operations on 3 different continents. I was able to join Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. I was able to attain several college degrees and to enter into the middle class, work in the private sector, and serve my community and my church. And today, I serve my neighbors in the House 85th District as their state representative here with each of you. My life matters. As a direct result of my late mother's unyielding commitment to loving her child, no matter the difficulties she faced, I am most proud and most blessed to be the loving husband of my wife, Talia, and the loving and devoted father to our 2 strong black boys and our 2 strong, beautiful little black girls. We teach them the great value that God has placed upon their lives. Their lives matter. There is no freedom, there is no right more valuable and in need of defense than the most foundational of freedoms, the right to life itself. Though I was supposed to be aborted, I stand before you today, a living, breathing testimony and proof that valuing both mothers and their babies is the loving choice. So again, I ask you, does your vote today on Value Them Both Amendment exhibit courage or cowardice? Courage is calling you. Trust women in Kansas. Respect the people of Kansas. Give the voters their voice on this important issue. I ask, I urge, I plea that you all vote to approve the Value Them Both constitutional amendment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this opportunity. Thank you all for your work for Kansas, and God bless you.
Representative Ballard for the second time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do have a question for the maker. My question would be, when I offered that amendment for exceptions, you said we don't necessarily need this. So my question to you, in HCR 5003, would a rape be covered? Would incest be covered? And would the life of the mother be covered?
Passage of this amendment would bring us right back to law as it currently was before April 26, 2019, before the Hodes and Nauser case ruling came out.
I understand your words a few minutes ago, but it still did not confirm for me that incest, rape, and the life of the mother was covered.
Yes, they are currently covered. They're always covered in Kansas as of right now.
They are covered right now, but would they still be covered if we pass this? And would Kansans be voting on it in the bill, or would it, in the resolution, or would it be out of the resolution?
I guess I don't understand how I'm not answering the question correctly. It would take us right back to how it was before the Hodes decision. So they are currently covered. We're going to keep them covered with this amendment, and it is in the amendment.
Okay. I still have concerns about that. You know, I would say, with looking at HCR 5003, a lot of it comes down to the choice of the woman. I think if we have a choice, we can decide to do this or we can decide to do that. But if the choice is taken away, we can't make that decision. And this is what I see HCR 5003 doing, taking away the choice. We all know that there are people that are okay with abortion and people that are not. I don't have a problem with that. Most of you know I don't. In fact, you've never really seen me come down here to really address that. I don't have an issue with that. The issue I have is people taking away my choice. And part of that is I should be able to make that choice. The Constitution gives me that right, the liberty to pursuit of happiness, in order to do that. And maybe we would say, that's okay, this is how I feel, and I vote this way. But I cannot believe, because I look for the good in all people. I have always looked for the good. And I cannot believe that inside all of us, we would not want to take away a person's choice to be able to make their own decision. I will vote no because I cherish and I value making my own decision. That to me is sacred. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Clayton for the second time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, body, as our debate slowly draws to a close, let's stop for a bit and sum up what this bill does and what it could have done and what it's really about. This bill makes the constitutional rights of Kansans subject to a vote of the people, and that's wrong. We had an opportunity to allow for exceptions for rape and incest and life of the mother, but instead the choice was made on this floor to leave a garbled double negative in the ballot language, deliberately confusing the very people that you say should vote. We've heard from many of you that we want to let them vote, but the choice was made to keep the election date in a highly charged, politicized primary when almost nobody goes to the polls. But enough about what could have been. Let's talk about what is. This bill, in its essence, is about power. It's about subjugating some Kansans to the will of other Kansans, creating a group of second-class citizens whose rights are subject to the whims of the majority. Today, you are voting to do that to people who can get pregnant, but tomorrow the person whose rights could go on the ballot could be yours. Sadly, the real power isn't with us. The power is with the proponents of this legislation.
Many of you in this chamber who plan to vote yes are actually really good people with really tough districts. And I know that you think that if you vote yes today, that will ease the burden in your re-elections, but one of the best people I know voted yes on this bill last year, and they still came after them and still took them out. A yes vote will not save you, and the ballot timing puts many of our best people in this body at risk. Please don't do that to yourselves, and please don't do that to each other. The proponents of this bill will bring incremental changes to abortion rights every year, so that every year we will have a stupid day like this, and every election they will threaten you with postcards. Voting yes will not make them go away, and it won't earn their respect. They have the real power because you are choosing to give it to them. They have no respect for us or the work that we do in this chamber. When you cast your vote, respect your constituents and their constitutional rights. But if you can't respect them, please at least have respect for yourselves and for the work that we do. Vote no on HCR 5003. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Is there further discussion? Seeing none, Representative, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This was a great debate, and I respect each and every one of you for speaking your minds. We were all elected to represent our constituents. Again, this vote is not any way, shape, or form a ban on abortion. This vote is simply allowing our constituents, the ones who elected us here, to vote on whether or not they agree with the Hodies and Nows ruling. Do they believe that there is a true right to an abortion within the Kansas Constitution? I personally do not believe that there is, and I know that my constituents also agree. Many of you campaigned on this issue, and now is your time to follow through with that campaign promise. So I'm asking you today, will you at least allow your constituents a vote on this issue? A yes vote means that you want your constituents' voices heard, and you want them to vote on this issue. A no vote means that you will not allow your constituents the right to vote or let their voices be heard. So with that, Mr. Chair, I move that when the committee rises and reports, it reports out House Concurrent Resolution 5003 favorably for passage.
I'd like to remind the body to refresh their browsers. This constitutes final action on HCR 5003. The clerk will open the roll, and you may record your vote. Representative Estes votes aye. Representative Vaughn votes no. Has every member had the opportunity to record their vote? The clerk will close the roll. Does any member desire to explain his or her vote? Does any member desire to change his or her vote? Representative Woodard for explanation of vote. Representative Woodard, before you begin, if you're in the galleries and do plan to have an explanation of vote, may come down and turn it in. You can come down now. Thank you. Representative Woodard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, while the outcome of today's debate is not surprising, the path to which the majority achieved the result is disappointing. Just 11 days ago, the People's House of Representatives stood here and swore an oath to the Kansas Constitution. Today, we are here rewriting it because of a disagreement with a co-equal branch of government. Unlike today's resolution, which does nothing to prevent unplanned pregnancies, I hope you will advance legislation that is proven to prevent unexpected pregnancies, expanding Medicaid, investing in mental health, universal health coverage of contraception, and comprehensive age-appropriate sexual education. I vote no on HCR 5003.
For explanation of vote, Representative Bishop.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I vote no on HCR 5003 because a constitutional right should not be subject to a popular vote. That is why it is called a right. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Heiberger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I vote no on HCR 5003 because I trust women.
Representative Hoy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I vote no on House Concurrent Resolution 5003. Individuals in the United States and Kansas have the right to a safe, legal abortion. A popular vote on this right risks medically unnecessary restrictions on health care that could leave doctors wasting time determining whether the best method to save a life violates the law. Lawmakers shouldn't interfere between physicians and their patients. Our role is to protect the safety of patients by ensuring that the practice of medicine is well regulated and improve access to prenatal and postpartum care. We must not deprive Kansans of the constitutional right to personal autonomy by unjustly singling out abortion.
Representative Ruiz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I vote no on this amendment. As a clinical social worker, I have to defend human rights. This doesn't just mean the right of men. This amendment will strip away women's reproductive rights, and everyone here knows it. This is nothing but a political move. I know that to be true because of the hypocrisy I have witnessed since we began this session. The President of the Senate spoke about individual rights when deciding to wear a mask. I sit in the gallery where many refuse to wear a mask, but yet voted yes to this amendment. Individual rights, I guess, doesn't apply to women. If that isn't hypocrisy, I don't know what it is.
Representative Featherston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I vote no on House Concurrent Resolution 5003. As a mother and a person of faith, I know the value of life. This bill doesn't end abortion, it ends safe, state-regulated abortion. This endangers pregnant people's lives. If we really want to end abortion, we need to address violence against those who become pregnant and access to appropriate and affordable health care for those people. Additionally, this bill discriminates against pregnant people by eliminating their ability to receive complete medical care. I do not vote for discrimination. Thank you.
Representative Fairchild. The clerk will read.
Mr. Speaker, I vote yes on House Concurrent Resolution 5003. I believe the value in both amendment is a step in the right direction since it would get the Kansas Supreme Court out of the abortion issue. However, I believe that we should do far more. I don't believe that those of us who are pro-life should be content with simply regulating abortion. Rather, our goal should be to abolish abortion entirely. That's what I'll continue to push for over the next 2 years. Representatives Fairchild, French, Lee Hahn, and Murphy.
Representative Poskin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I vote no on House Concurrent Resolution 5003. As the mother of 7 children, I will not vote for a bill that could lead to a death sentence for any of my daughters or daughters-in-law who might tragically develop a life-threatening condition during pregnancy. Nor would I strip my granddaughter's parents of their right to make a decision regarding these girls' well-being, should, God forbid, the horror of a rape also result in the trauma of a childhood pregnancy. Like the majority of my constituents, I don't believe legislators or voters should insert themselves into the physician-patient relationship. Instead, I support evidence-based best practices that are proven to reduce abortion rates. Thank you.
Representative Day.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I vote no on HCR 5003. I'm looking forward to perhaps working on legislation that provides the funding for education and care for the reproductive rights of the citizens of Kansas. I would prefer to live in a state and in a country where reproductive decisions are mine and mine alone to make. I have a right to these choices. I will be defending that right for myself and others. I did defend that right by voting no on this bill today. Thank you.
Representative Wagner.
Mr. Speaker, I proudly cast my vote in the affirmative on HCR 5003. The Kansas Supreme Court's 2019 Hodes decision was an odious denial of justice for the unborn. Any appeal to personal autonomy that facilitates the death of another human is invalid and inhumane. Any court ruling that will lead to the taxpayers of all persuasions having to fund abortion with their own tax money is deeply immoral. To merely return Kansas abortion law to where it was in 2018 is frankly the least we could do. Strict scrutiny? I say let the voters of 2022 scrutinize the legal and moral failings of the Kansas Supreme Court.
Representative Byers.
Mr. Speaker, I vote no on HCR 5003.
As a distinctly unique individual in this chamber, as one who has been blessed with seeing life through the man's eyes, but with a woman's heart, I believe that people who can become pregnant should have the right to personal body and autonomy, and because of that, I affirm that I vote no.
Any further explanation of votes? Representative Sawyer.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I vote no on HCR 5003. This bill is too extreme for Kansas. Stripping the rights of bodily autonomy is an all-out attack on women. Giving future legislatures the ability to regulate abortions, even in the cases of rape, incest, or saving the life of the mother, is wrong. Furthermore, putting this constitutional amendment on the August ballot will absolutely deny the rights of all Kansans to voice their opinion. This is purely a political maneuver. These very personal and private decisions ought to be made between a woman, her family, her doctor, and God. I vote no.
Representative Humphreys.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I vote yes because I trust women and men in Kansas to make the decision if there is a right to abortion in the Kansas Constitution. A constitution, by the way, that was voted on to ratify by the citizens of Kansas. If we sit idly by, women and babies will be harmed. I trust that Kansans want to protect the rights of all women in Kansas, born and unborn women. Give them that chance. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I vote no on HCR 5003. This resolution goes out of its way to say to pregnant Kansans whose lives are in danger that the members of this legislature reserve the right to deny them life-saving care. It does so in support of so-called protections previously passed. I place the lives of pregnant Kansans ahead of font size mandates. Mr. Speaker, I vote no.
Representative Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I vote yes on HCR 5003. The rights that have been given to us by our Creator God are meant to be defended and honored for the prosperity and protection of future generations. This should assure us that the people of Kansas who enjoy and possess equal and inalienable natural rights such as life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness should be upheld and defended by this legislative body through the Value Them Both Amendment. The will and voices of Kansans should be heard as they make the choice for themselves who will represent the values they have personally placed upon their own lives. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Any further explanation of vote? Does any member desire to change his or her vote? Seeing none. 86 voted in favor and 38 against the passage of HCR 5003. The same having received a constitutional majority, the resolution is hereby declared passed. The clerk will record the vote. Reports of standing committees, the clerk will read.
Committee on Judiciary recommends House Bill 2008 be passed. Committee on Calendar and Printing recommends on requests for resolutions and certificates that requests by Representative Francis and Cywart be approved and the Chief Clerk of the House be directed to order the printing of said certificates and the drafting of said resolutions. We need a motion.
Representative for motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move adoption of the calendar and printing report.
You've heard the motion. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. Please remind the body to submit your explanation of vote to the clerk in electronic format within the next 30 minutes. I'd like to go back to introduction of bills. Is there objection to return that order of business? The clerk will read.
House Bill number 2119 by the Committee on K-12 Education Budget, an act concerning education, creating the Student Empowerment Act, providing education savings accounts for students who are academically at risk. House Bill number 2120 by the Committee on Judiciary, an act concerning crimes, punishment, and criminal procedure relating to sex offenses, sexual battery, removing spousal exception. House Bill number 2121 by the Committee on Corrections and Juvenile Justice, an act concerning crimes, punishment, and criminal procedure relating to defendants who abscond from supervision. House Bill number 2122 by the Committee on Federal and State Affairs, an act enacting the Supported Decision-Making Agreements Act relating to decision-making assistance for adults.
Are there announcements? Representative Tarwater.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is for the commerce individuals. We will be having a meeting on Monday. We will be having a hearing on HB 2112 and HB 2097. Thank you.
Any other announcements? Majority Leader Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move the House adjourn until Monday, January 25th at 11 a.m. pro forma. You still have to come in and go to your committees, but the session will be pro forma. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
You've heard the motion to adjourn. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. We are adjourned.
Good boy, thanks.